Hi everybody, and welcome to what is the first in a series of Emerging Minds online interactive events. So my name is Dan Moss, and it gives me a lot of pleasure to be able to facilitate this event today in partnership with Kate Headley. Kate is a speech pathologist from the Links Trauma Healing Service in Newcastle, and Kate was really instrumental in the development of the Supporting Children Who Have Experienced Trauma course. Kate, welcome.
Thanks. Hello. Hi, everyone.
So before we begin, I'd just like to recognise the land on which we meet today, everyone that's joining us from all across Australia. We'd like to pay respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, their ancestors, their elders past, present and future from the different First Nations across this country. We acknowledge the importance of connection to land, culture, spirituality, ancestry, family and community for the well-being of all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children and their families. So today's online session has been developed really in response to your questions about the Supporting Children Who Have Experienced Trauma. So we really appreciate that so many of you have actually completed the course, but also the questions and the engagement that's come from you. And really what this has done is prompt us to think of how we can continue to use your feedback to really guide the future content that we do. So today we'll be using Mentimeter to gather some data from you about really what you need and what you're looking for from future content from Emerging Minds. So Kate, as I just mentioned, you were really heavily involved in the development at all aspects of the Supporting Children Who Have Experienced Trauma course. Can you describe for us a little bit about your involvement in that course?
Yeah. It was a really exciting opportunity for me, and something I have to say that I'm really proud of. I think the course is an excellent resource, and I've had lots of feedback from allied health colleagues about how useful they've found the course and the content, and a lot of people utilising that across their teams. And so I kind of became involved when Emerging Minds contacted Speech Pathology Australia, and they connected with the Senior Advisor for Mental Health and Justice. And then she was able to kind of describe the work I've been doing at the Links Trauma Healing Service, and then put me in contact with your team. And my role, I guess, in the development of the course has been the opportunity to give my clinical thoughts and experience around those practitioner shifts, to provide consultation around the course content, and obviously as a speech pathologist, specifically to some of the content around communication skills. And then a really fun and interesting part for me was being able to do some consultation around the scripting and the recording for the videos that are in Module 2, which we actually see, a psychologist implementing some of those course content skills and strategies in her day-to-day work with a young person.
Thanks, Kate. Yeah, really looking forward to hearing a bit more about that. And from my personal experience, that the experience that we have with practitioners like yourself, Kate, is so instrumental to the work that we do at Emerging Minds. So we're really hopeful that today's online event can also help us connect with many more practitioners across multiple sectors who are working not only with children who have experienced trauma, but children and parents in general. So yeah, really looking forward to that opportunity today. So without further ado, let's talk a little bit about today's objectives. So really today we want to help you consider and develop key messages that underpin supportive and engaging practice with children who have experienced trauma. For those of you who have completed the Supporting Children Who Have Experienced Trauma course, we want to discuss with you the development of the 5 practitioner perspective shifts in Module 1 of the course, and the development of the 5 stages of engagement with children, which was developed through Module 2 of this course. Really importantly, we want to gather your information about your practice experience and work with children who have experienced trauma. We also want to gather information about how we can tailor future trauma course content that will most effectively help you in your work with children. And also, if we can, we want to continue to make connections with you to further the work that we do at Emerging Minds around children's mental health. So, Kay, in thinking about some of the key messages in this course, and I'm going to talk a little bit about key messages from talking to practitioners like yourself, and really importantly from people with lived experience around trauma, either from their own perspective or that have had children who have experienced trauma. Can you tell us a little bit about how the key messages in the course have supported your practice?
So I think for me, in the first module of the course, we've got that real focus on the practitioner shifts. And that for me really provides that kind of ideal framework around which to embed your reflective practice as a clinician on the ground. And I think we can be continuously asking ourselves questions around those practitioner shifts in that kind of continuous improvement cycle in our work with young people. And when I kind of reflect on then those stages of engagement that we discuss more in Module 2 of the course, my reflections have been that that has been really helpful for helping me to label phases of my clinical work that potentially I was being a bit intuitive about. And it's been really helpful to be able to solidify and label what it is I'm doing it and why it is I'm doing that phase, I guess, of relationship building and intervention with a child. And that in itself is really helpful as a clinician, because then you can always feel really, I guess, like you've got a strong foundation and the right words to be able to explain to the young person and the people around them why it is you're doing what you're doing as a clinician.
Thanks, Kate. That's fascinating. So just summarising on the key messages, and they've been on the screen, so you've probably had time to read them. But when, as Emerging Minds, we embarked on this project of doing a practice course, showing some practice skills around children with trauma, invariably what our practitioners and people with lived experience told us is that initial engagement is key, that you can't just meet with a child or young person and expect them to start disclosing areas of trauma that affected their life, that you need to have an understanding of how their experience of trauma might affect how they are with you initially, might affect the fact that they might be ambivalent or reluctant about coming in to engage with a professional, might affect how their trust has developed over their childhood. We heard from practitioners like Kate and our child and family partners that much of the skill in this work needs to be demonstrated before or as a prerequisite to discussing the details of trauma. And that's why, as you would have seen, Module 1 and 2 really deal with stages of engagement and practitioner perspectives that allow children to find their voice. Not so much around disclosing what's happened to them, but just being able to start to feel confident, naming the skills and know-how they have, naming their values, naming their hopes, and talking about the key relationships within their lives. Kate in particular was someone that talked a lot about helping practitioners to understand communication as behaviour, and behaviour as also communication, and how that we can work with children and young people to really help them to think about what's going on in their bodies and in their nervous systems at the moment. So much of what we do in the course also allows us to do this. Also, a key message that we got continually from practitioners like Kate and others is that we need to be able to give the child a place to stand in contrast to the trauma that they've experienced, particularly if, like Charlie, who we're about to think about, they're thinking very many negative things about themselves and making sense of their childhood in negative ways. So let's think about Charlie. And Charlie, for those of you that have been through Module 1 of the course and other of Emerging Minds products will know that Charlie's a kid who is experiencing domestic and family violence at home, where Charlie's father is being really aggressive, coercive and controlling, particularly towards Charlie's mum, Kay, but Charlie is also experiencing many of the effects of this abuse. So Charlie, like many of you will be accustomed to, comes into his initial engagement with a practitioner feeling that everything that's happening, the trauma in his life, everything bad that's happening is his fault. He feels like he's a bad kid, like he's let his parents down. He feels that his dad's behaviour is his fault. It's because he's weak, lazy and stupid, that the violence only started because Charlie asked for it. Charlie might feel like he actually can't tell you anything because it might upset you. He might feel that he can't tell you what's happened because you might think that what's happening is his fault, that you might blame him for what's happening, or that you might think he's different or a freak. So in many of our courses recently, what we've done is actually worked with the 5 practice shifts. So these are 5 practitioner shifts which help practitioners think differently about children, that help practitioners engage with ambivalent or reluctant children like Charlie and help them to find their voice within the therapeutic engagement. So just really quickly going through these 5 practitioner shifts, a categories to context perspective shifts means being open-minded and curious when you're considering your approaches to children like Charlie. It's moving away from categorizations of Charlie, which has him feeling like he's weak or stupid or a naughty kid, or he might have a mental health issue. The theme of passive to active refers to shifts in practitioners' perspective of the child. The practitioner assumes that children like Charlie have strengths, skills, stories and knowledge which they can bring into practice with them. Naive to knowledgeable means that no child is a passive recipient of trauma. It means that children like Charlie have strengths, knowledges and understandings of their past, which, if they're allowed to, can be brought into a practice session. Recipients to contributors means that from the very first engagement with a child, that there are many ways that we can show that we're interested in their contribution to their engagement with you. And top down to bottom up accountability means that we show Charlie and children like him that we're there for him, that this is not an exercise where he is doing things in order to please or to meet our expectations. So just in thinking of that really quick description of those 5 practice shifts, Kate, can you tell me about the naive to knowledgeable practice shift? How, because you talk about that a little bit in the course. So how would you use that shift in particular to engage Charlie in the context of service engagement?
So I think, first of all, for all the participants today, I just kind of want to put it out there that I'm really aware that the first time I watched the videos of Charlie, I found that really confronting. And, really realistically, a bit difficult to watch. But at the same time, I reflected what an extremely powerful learning opportunity to challenge our perspectives as clinicians and, to showcase the fact that often when a young person is in front of us, we have no idea really what is happening for them in other environments of their life. And certainly through the videos, I'm really struck by how little opportunity Charlie has to demonstrate his knowledge of his situation. And yet we get to see him using a range of really appropriate strategies to try and meet his own needs in that circumstance. So we see him, you know, sitting with his dog's belongings in the shed, or looking at videos of him and his dog to try and calm himself at nighttime when he's in bed. And I think that demonstrates so clearly that Charlie is knowledgeable, and we need to make sure that he knows that, and that he knows we know that. So I guess some of the strategies I might utilize to try and demonstrate that to Charlie include, you know, from the outset, I want to explain to him my role and the referral information I have about him. But from that point forward, I want to give him opportunity to guide what areas of my practice are difficult for him. So, for example, I might use some descriptors of communication activities, like listening to the teacher in the classroom, and let him put that on a continuum or a scale to show me how difficult he finds that task. You know, I might, throughout my interactions with Charlie, I want to provide feedback around my observations of the ways that he's demonstrating his knowledge to try and meet his own needs. So, you know, I might say something to him like, that seems like a really clever idea to me. Or if we're discussing a strategy that he might be using that actually isn't as adaptive, or, you know, what other people perceive as acceptable, I still want him to recognize that he's doing a good thing by trying to meet his needs, that he's knowledgeable of what his needs are. So I might say something along the lines of, I can see why you would try to avoid something that feels difficult. That makes sense to me. So I might not be reinforcing the less adaptive strategy, but I'm helping to build his confidence in his knowledge of his own needs. And then, you know, throughout, I kind of want to make sure that throughout my whole intervention with Charlie, I'm including him in the prioritization of goals. He's an equal contributor to what's working, not working in an intervention, what works for him in knowing if he's progressing towards his goals. And I guess with all of those strategies, I'm just trying to help empower him to recognize that within our dynamic, he is the knowledgeable person of his own experiences. And I'm just trying to reinforce that messaging consistently in the way I work with him.
Yeah. So what you're describing there, Kate, is a really kind of thorough and diligent, skillful practice in having Charlie position himself in a helpful or knowledgeable way in the practice session or engagement with you. And that happens even before, you know, you can even start to contemplate his experiences, or certainly contemplating childhood trauma.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it kind of showcases a little bit too that these practice shifts will be integrated across your work with a young person. They're not sequential in any way. Many of those same strategies are also positioning him as an active contributor, and as a contributor and not a recipient of his services. So they work really well together.
Yeah, thanks, Kate. Okay, so we're now going to talk about the 5 stages of engagement. And so these were developed throughout their work with child and family partners and practitioners in the development of the Supporting Children Who've Experienced Trauma course. And as I was talking about before, they were so crucial because so many practitioners, such as Kate, told us that there is so much skillful work that needs to happen before a child can even get close to disclosing what's happened to them as a child. And so the 5 stages of engagement are about, as Kate started to discuss then, beginning a conversation. So really providing clear messages from your start that your intention is to centre children like Charlie and Jenny, who we'll see later, in all stages of your engagement. The development of intent and purpose, which Kate will talk about a little bit, is really negotiating the intent and purpose of your engagement by providing clear choices to children and being transparent about what you know about their story. So giving the child a place to stand in relation to the trauma is what our psychologist did a lot in the second module in her work with Jenny, really helping Jenny get clear about the values that she had, and in particular, she had very strong values about the protection of her younger sister, helping her get clear about that and how she demonstrates these in her own life. The practitioner or psychologist also helped notice resilience and protest with Jenny. And Jenny had a long history of being able to show adults the things in her life that she was not particularly happy about, the things in her life that she thought were unjust. And through her work with the practitioner, she started to see herself as someone who made these protests. And that was very different from a child who in the beginning just saw herself as a kid who was a troublemaker or who was doing the wrong thing by the adults in her life. Checking in with the child becomes extremely important when a child might be describing traumatic events, because it allows them to regularly review the progress with you as a practitioner, making sure that the sessions aren't moving or the conversations aren't moving too slowly or fast for them, and that they're feeling safe and secure with your engagement with them. So I talked very quickly there, Kate, about the developing intent and purpose. And I know this was something that you talked with Emerging Minds about at length. I'm wondering if you could tell us about how you go about establishing intent and purpose with children who have experienced trauma.
I think I probably spoke a lot with Emerging Minds about it, because it is something I feel really strongly about, in the sense that one of my observations in my work has been just how many people that sometimes children who've experienced complex trauma have come in and out of their lives. So they're often, I'm working with young people who've often frequently changing caseworkers. They might be experiencing multiple and different carers at quite regular frequency. They might have a whole range of different medical professionals, allied health professionals, education staff, lots of different people coming in and out of their life. And I get really fearful that children are at a risk of developing some learnt helplessness around that. And it's not unusual for me to meet young people who have been to a multitude of appointments in the months preceding me meeting them, and they can't tell me why they were there or who that person was or even what they did there or why they went. So I do feel really strongly that this is a really important part of stages of engagement with young people. And I think it helps to reduce the risk of developing learnt helplessness. And like you mentioned, we see the psychologist in module 2 in her work with Jenny use a range of different strategies to help develop this intent and purpose. So we certainly see her talking with Jenny and asking Jenny's permission around what information to be recorded, essentially, and then added to, Jenny's story. We hear her verbally reflecting back Jenny's words and intent, so that they've got that shared agreement on what that communication was intended to mean for Jenny. And then we see her using some visual representation of the information that she has collected and learnt about Jenny. And I think we see in that section of the video that becomes really key to developing a collaborative relationship between the two of them. And there's this really gorgeous moment in the video where we see Jenny almost unable to not contribute. Like, she sees all the info there and here's the psychologist talking to it. And suddenly she's like, yeah, but that's not all I like. She's like, there's so much more to me. There's so much more I want to add to the picture of my story. And it's such a powerful little moment shown in the video.
Yeah.
And when I think about intent and purpose, I'm also really mindful again that it can be helpful to regularly revisit intent and purpose of your work with a child, because I think there is a risk in thinking that this is a phase of engagement only at the start of a therapeutic relationship, and having ways to revisit goals, to review progress towards those goals, or to be able to modify the goals if the young person's context changes, can be really regular ways to reinforce the intent and purpose of your therapeutic relationship with each other.
Yeah, thank you, Kate. And you talked a little bit about the psychologist's work with Jenny there, and which is a really great segue, because we're going to just show a video now, and hopefully most of you will have seen the psychologist's work in the course with Jenny, but we'll just pick up here where the psychologist has just worked with Jenny and really giving her a strong place to stand about her values and the intent of her relationship with her younger sister, who she's really worried about because she's not going to be able to see as much because of moving schools. So we're just going to pick that up here where the psychologist is talking about why she asked the kind of questions to Jenny that she did.
I noticed right away that Jenny was more animated and engaged when I asked her about her little sister Charlie. I began to wonder if being separated from Charlie was one of Jenny's big worries, but it was really important that I didn't assume this and that I remained curious. I asked questions, which allowed some more information to emerge about what is important to Jenny, which also showed me the values that are important to her. For example, the way she described the commitment she's made to be a protective and caring big sister, and to make life as fair and safe for Charlie as possible. I asked questions to help her reflect on what this commitment might mean for Charlie. Jenny described the love that her little sister has for her and the appreciation of her support. When I asked her if all big sisters would do what she does for Charlie, and she reflected that no, what she does is probably fairly unique, this started to give Jenny a place to stand in contrast to her experiences of trauma. Whatever has happened to Jenny in her life, she has refused to let anyone take away her commitment to Charlie and her commitment to fairness. And if Jenny thinks that Charlie deserves to be treated safely and fairly, then it opens the way for her to understand that she also deserves these things. I noticed right away that Jenny was more animated.
Okay, so now we are going to engage with you, which a big part of today is about your thoughts. So we're just going to give you a couple of minutes. We want you to use your phone or tablet to go to www.menti.com and use the code 59387775, which is on your screen there. So I'll just give you a couple of minutes to do that. And what we're wanting to know from you is, was there an important practice stage or understanding, just looking at the 5 stages of engagement there, that was not covered in this course? Because we want to know this to inform our future courses around not only trauma, but other content around children's mental health as well. So just some free text there, some short thoughts about what was missing or what you think could be covered in more depth. And while people log in and do that, Kate, I might just ask you, thinking about future courses, do you reckon there were important practice stages that could have been considered more fully or differently?
Yeah, look, in terms of thinking forward, and one thing I really appreciate with the Emerging Minds courses is that, you know, I think they do offer you opportunity to start to learn about an area of clinical practice, and then to, you know, learn that in more and more depth over a period of time. So moving forward after this course, I guess some of the things that I've been thinking about and reflecting on as a clinician is in terms of that practice stage of beginning a conversation, what skill set can we develop and how do we do that when children don't present in ways that we're used to? So when I reflect on Jenny, you know, we can see that she's showing some reluctance to engage in the videos. But, you know, on the measure of things, she's still able to be in the room, predominantly, you know, look at the psychologist occasionally, participate in some negotiations around boundaries for topics of discussion. But I think we can all feel really challenged in how to begin a conversation with children where maybe they're really hugely avoidant of interaction or they have immense difficulties with interacting with people. So I think that that could be an area of skills to delve into further in the future. And I'm also really wondering about, in terms of noticing resilience and protest, what skills can we develop as clinicians in helping to reshape the perceptions and interpretations of this in people around the child? So kind of sitting with that positive behaviour support framework as well, because I think predominantly as a society and the structures within our society can, you know, really place a value on children behaving in certain ways and expected ways. And it can be really hard for people to reimagine that what they perceive as an inappropriate behaviour is actually a strength and talks to a positive characteristic of the child. So I think there's opportunity there for us as clinicians to learn more about building our skills in that area as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Kate. So as you can see, there are some amazing kind of responses coming through on our screen. We've got about 15 at the moment, which is great. They're continuing to expand, and I can see some great responses there. We might move on. What we will do is collate these responses and send them out to people with the recordings of today's online event. And thank you so much for people that have started to provide feedback, and we're certainly, this is, I think, the beginning of an intensive stage for emerging minds and thinking about, we've got to a certain space with these courses around supporting children with trauma. What are the new spaces that we need to step into now, particularly as we start to get into that practice school of where children might name their experiences of trauma. So thank you. I think we might go now on to the Mentimeter Survey 2, now that we're getting the hang of it. And so just bear with me as we bring up the second. So this allows you to make a choice from a variety of different options there: confidentiality, transparency, activities with children, communications, ending conversations, safety, or other. And what we're really wanting to know is, has any aspect of your practice changed as a result of your involvement of this course? Really wanting to know how these courses are being influential within your own practice, or if they are really. And so, Kate, you've obviously been so heavily involved in this course. Has there been any aspect of your practice that you have since begun to develop or change?
Yeah, I think it'd be fair to say many. Like anything, when you spend a lot of time reflecting on best practice in an area, it kind of drives within you that desire to make sure that you're doing the best that you can with that knowledge as well. I think for me, there's a few things that come to mind. So in terms of those practitioner shifts, I have been really thinking about, how can we as clinicians support children to enter new environments and new relationships with their strengths and capabilities being the focus of that initial engagement? And that really sits with that perspective shift of categories to context. And we see that really showcased in the videos with Charlie. And I've been really wondering about tools and ways to do that. Still thinking about those practitioner shifts. I've been really striving in my own personal practice to be more conscious of any service system pressures that I might be experiencing, I guess, in line with that practitioner shift of top down to bottom up accountability. And I think just taking time to be conscious of what those service system pressures might be, whether that's, you know, a need for a label so a child can access funding, or a need for a label so that people, you know, can look at different environments, or whatever might be the case. Being aware of those service system pressures can kind of help you as a clinician resist any sense of systemic pressure that might then negatively impact your ability to really put the child and the family at the center of practice, and just have your work guided by their priorities and their needs. And then in regards to the stages of engagement, my work on this course, and this probably was a real new area of focus for me, has been I've really increased my focus on the importance of helping children to identify their values and how they demonstrate those, so that those real acts of resilience and protest and values. And so I'm just really conscious of that in my clinical practice now, and try to take every incidental opportunity to draw a child's attention to that in my interactions with them.
Yeah, thanks, Kate. And thanks to all of you who are kind of starting to give some answers now. We've got about 20 now, and they're still coming in. And I think it looks like lots of you, or 11 of the 20, have talked about transparency as a really kind of important area of your practice change as a result of your involvement in the course. And that's really interesting, because so much of what we talk to practitioners like Kate and others in the development of the course was this importance of transparency with children, particularly those children, I guess, who have had their trust taken away or abused through their interpersonal relationships with adults, and how, as a practitioner, you can, as often as possible, let the child know what you know, so that does more to create a sense of equality and reciprocity within their engagement. So that's great. We might now go on to the third Mentimeter survey, which really, thinking ahead, we're now in a place, as we've talked at Emerging Minds, to take the Jenny story just that little bit further. So much of what you would have seen the psychologist do in Module 2 really was to take Jenny on a bit of a journey. So when Jenny first came in, a bit like Charlie, she was quite ambivalent or anxious, reluctant to be there. But she is now, after several sessions with that psychologist, at a stage where she might begin to feel safe to disclose some of the things that happened to her as a child. And these might include a number of things. They might include physical or sexual abuse or chronic neglect. Now, how the practitioner responds to these disclosures might make a difference in the healing journey for Jenny. It might make a difference between how she feels about discussing these events in the future. And the very first reaction from the psychologist might really form a sense of safety for Jenny in how she is able to share these experiences in the future. But of course, there are so many challenges in being able to respond to disclosures, and Emerging Minds has certainly done a lot of work in this space about hearing from practitioners what the challenges are, and certainly hearing from people with lived experience about what the challenges are for them or their children in disclosing what's actually happened to them in the past. So we're really interested to hear from you. What are the most challenging aspects of your practice when a child discloses trauma? And Kate, in thinking about this, and thinking about your responses to disclosures, what are do you think the most challenging aspects for your practice?
Yeah, I think a lot of people on the screen through the survey are kind of reflecting a lot of those same things. We've got this really shared, I think a lot of shared challenges in this space. You know, as a speech pathologist, I reflect on the fact that, you know, I think there is a lot of there's a lot of fear associated with being in a situation where a child discloses trauma. And if I'm really realistic and honest, you know, I don't think any of my training as a speech pathologist kind of armed me with the knowledge of how to manage this kind of conversation. They're kind of skills that I've developed through learning from other people who've got experience in this space, really. And I think some of that fear is associated with the perception that you might be re-traumatizing a child by talking with them about their disclosures. I think there's also a fear that plays in people's minds of, oh, I know I'm going to have to do something with this information. Might be my mandatory reporting requirements. It might be about having difficult conversations with other people around this child. And I think, you know, this fear of how do I interact with this young person now and shape this conversation to get the information I'm going to need to also meet those professional requirements that I have at any given moment. And I'm also just really mindful that it can be just awfully confronting and sad and anger inducing to hear the experiences that children have had. And as you know, we need to feel, I guess, psychologically safe ourselves in our workplaces, that we have supports in place to help us to manage our own emotional reactions to a disclosure of trauma.
Thanks, Kate. And so much of what you're saying is really kind of resonating with what we're reading on the screen there, particularly that, you know, being able to remain kind of neutral and sympathetic without being horrified or shocked or upset yourself when a child does disclose particularly kind of vivid instances of abuse is something that we've heard consistently from practitioners across the country. And also on the flip side, we've heard from our child and family partners that this is so important that they, before they tell their stories, they're often very frightened that they're going to upset the practitioner. And if they can see evidence of this practitioner being upset, that might dissuade them from in the future sharing their stories. So that's really fantastic information for us. Thank you so much for all of you out there who are busy on your phones or tablets typing in your responses. We've got one more task for you, and then we'll kind of give you a break. So the next survey is, again, thinking ahead to our future courses. So if we, for example, were thinking about doing a course where Jenny or another child talks in more specificity about the details of their abuse, we want you to rank the practice skills that should be supported through this course. And these are confidentiality, transparency, activities with children, ending conversations, and safety. So really kind of keen to hear what you think about that. Kate, just thinking about the context of your own practice as a speech pathologist, if you worked with Jenny and she disclosed childhood trauma, whether that be sexual or physical abuse, what skills might you utilise in your work with her? And how do you think could future e-learning courses that Emerging Minds contribute to help you practice with Jenny?
So, you know, I'm the first, Dan, to kind of put my hand up and say I've been on an immense learning curve with this set of skills in recent years. You know, and I don't position myself as an expert in any way with that, but some of my learnings in this space over the last few years has been that you know, if Jenny was to make a disclosure, it's always going to be my aim just to let her talk freely and to try not to interrupt that for her. And certainly just to be mindful that in that interaction, it is not my job to try and, you know, literally pepper Jenny with questions or drag out details and information, but just to hold that space and interaction with her and let her disclose what she would like to disclose. Like lots of people mentioned in the previous survey, I want to be super mindful of my nonverbal communication. So thinking about my body language, my facial expression, my tone of voice, because I would never want Jenny to perceive that she shouldn't have made a disclosure. I think it's really important that I am transparent with Jenny as to what I need to do with that information following that disclosure. That speaks to all of our stages of engagement, really. And I need to know that it's important that I seek clarification on areas that relate to Jenny's immediate safety. So, for example, you know, if it was a disclosure about a particular person, I might ask some questions to know more about, is that someone Jenny currently has contact with? What are the absolute immediate risks to Jenny at the moment? And then, as you mentioned, you know, of course, you know, I'm a speech pathologist, I'm not a mental health clinician. So I've got to be aware of my scope of practice and seek that support and advice. And I certainly have had to do that, particularly when, you know, a young person might make a disclosure and I'm concerned about the risks to their safety, and we've had to do some safety planning. That's where I've really had to utilise the skills of my mental health colleagues to support me in my practice with that young person.
Thanks, Kate. So results here, and we've had 33 of you contribute to these results. So we're getting more and more as we go. Oh, it's ticked over to 34. And also must say thank you to the 140 plus of you who have joined us for our first online interactive event. We're really thrilled that so many of you, firstly have shown an interest in our Supporting Children Who Have Experienced Trauma course, but also are happy to give up your time or lunch hours to continue the conversation with us. So thank you to all of you. So this is really interesting because transparency kind of won the last Mentimeter survey that we did, but now it's really, people are thinking about activities with children and communication with parents as the two main practice skills that should be supported. And that's really interesting. I know, Kate, you were around for lots of conversations that we had with practitioners who really did discuss this kind of where to next when a child discloses. How can we have a meaningful conversation with a child or a parent about what's happened in a child's past, but how can we do this in a way that's not too confronting, or in a way that might give a child new or alternative understandings of what's happened, which positions them as not passive recipients of what happened, but in ways that shows the resilience and strength and know-how that they've used to get themselves through really tough experiences. So, okay, we might now move on to our next slide. And it's discussion time. So we've now got a little bit more, very little time because we've had so much rich conversation already. But Kate, a lot of what we've talked today about has been really, I suppose, readiness for a child to feel like that it's okay to talk to you as a practitioner about some really private and personal, distressing things that's happened in their lives. As a practitioner, what are the most important principles for you in actually getting a child to that stage where they might feel it's actually okay to talk to Kate about you know, some of these really hard things? How do you do that? What are you mindful of? I know that's a big question, but it seems so much of what we've talked about today really centres on that.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know, like you said, it is a big question. And if you're really trying to pull it down into a nutshell, my clinical experience over the last few years has kind of taught me that if we have developing a trustful relationship at the core of all the work that we do with young people, it seems to hold them in really good stead. And I think many of those practitioner shifts and stages of engagement at their core speak to trust. So we're trusting the young person's, you know, experiences. We're trusting the young person's perceptions of that experience. We're utilizing transparency as a tool to develop trust. We are you know, being mindful of sharing information as much as possible with young people as a tool for developing trust. And one thing that kind of has really struck me in some of the work I've been doing is that, you know, sadly, the impacts of complex trauma can be really, you know, far reaching across many domains of a child's life. And the research does tell us that people who experience complex trauma as children are likely to come in and out of service systems across their lifetime. And so I'm really mindful that if we can implement these great practice frameworks like we've tried to showcase in this course, hopefully we are giving young people an experience of a service that they find helpful. And my hope with that is that that then helps encourage and increase the likelihood that they will continue to access support services as they need across their lifetime for whatever their current goals and support needs are at the time. So we're really trying to use good practice guidelines when children are young to almost give people a positive taste of the service system and how to work with service providers to get their needs met and contribute to people having better lives across their lifespan.
Thank you, Kat. Can I just also say thank you to people who have used the Q&A section to send their questions directly to us. Obviously, we're kind of running very low on time today because we have had so much rich conversations. But if you want to use that option to continue asking us questions, we will definitely respond to those. And again, they're really important questions in helping us define and refine the scope of the future content that we do produce in the trauma space. So I'm just going to move on now and talk to you a little bit about some resources that Emerging Minds has, which really support the conversations that we have today. So in the e-learning space, we have a couple of resources around working with children who have experienced trauma. Obviously, the Supporting Children Who Have Experienced Trauma is the e-learning resource that we have been discussing today, and that's the one that contains Charlie and Jenny with her work with the psychologist. So really, if you haven't had a chance to go through that e-learning yet, we would really love you to be able to do that and continue the conversation with us. Let us know what you think. Touch base with us about what the course did to help you improve or develop your practice, or what the course didn't do, what you're looking for in subsequent courses. If that's around activities with children or thinking more about transparency, let us know. The more information and data that we have, the more effective the offerings that we can provide for you. We've got some webinars that we've done in the past. One of them in particular featuring Kate. So if you'd like to hear more of Kate's thoughts, please log on to the webinar that we have there around the practice skills of working with children who have experienced trauma. We've got some other resources and podcasts there that I won't go through one by one, so I might just skip through those as we're talking. We've got some podcasts there, again, one of them featuring Kate. So Kate, if people enjoyed what you had to say today, they've got many opportunities to hear more of your words over the coming days and weeks. We've got some really great podcasts there, which we really hope that you'll be able to spend some time looking through, including something a bit different. We've interviewed resilience, shame and secrecy, and really thought about the impact of those three things in the lives of children who have experienced trauma, and how as practitioners we can be really mindful of these things in work with any of the children that we work with. And just skip through to the last one, which is just talking about some papers that we have in working with children. So that's really all the time that we have today. Just to let you know that a recording of today's sessions and the presenter's slides will be emailed to all participants in the coming weeks. This includes the lists of the further resources, which we've just talked through really quickly. Given the success of today, we're going to continue the online interactive session. So our next session is on Thursday, the 27th of May. This will take a deeper dive into our latest online e-learning suite of engaging children. So please keep an eye out in our newsletter for further details. And if you haven't already, please register on www.emergingminds.com.au/subscribe. So from me personally, a big thank you to Kate today. I think her involvement in today's online event, as well as her involvement with Emerging Minds throughout the last 6 months, has been so helpful to us and hopefully so helpful to you today. We'd also like to thank the other practitioners that we have that we've worked with, not only in the development of the Supporting Children Who Have Experienced Trauma course, but in all of the content that Emerging Minds delivers. But also really importantly, probably most important, is that we'd like to acknowledge the significant contribution of our child and family partners who contribute their lived experience with such generosity and wisdom. And they've done that throughout the development of the Supporting Children Who Have Experienced Trauma course. We'd like to acknowledge their contribution in all of our content and in their work supporting practice which improves children's mental health. So this has been such a wonderful hour. I kind of feel like I'd like to ask Kate about another 100 questions and let's keep this conversation going. I think it's such a worthwhile forum for us to have, and we look forward to touching base with so many of you around the country as we look forward to bringing to you more content which really looks at practice skills in working with children who have experienced trauma. Thank you so much and goodbye.